in his world of progress and technology, man convinces himself that there's nothing out there, nothing moving in the shadows beyond the arc of his peripheral vision, nothing in the light taking account of his deeds and actions. In this podcast, we will discuss the paranormal, hauntings, spirituality, all things between the darkness and the light, angels, demons, the universe within, and the universe without. I'm Paul James Caiden, and this is The Spirit Side. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Paul James Caiden, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Christ conspiracy. Now, what exactly is the Christ conspiracy? There are several definitions of that term in this day and age, I suppose, but the one we're going to take a close look at in this podcast is the one that tells us that the story of Jesus Christ as written in the Gospels is the exact same as many former pagan gods. Now, maybe some of you out there have heard about this or seen the list where there are such gods as Horus, Dionysus, Attis, Mithra, Krishna, Buddha, and there's usually a little check box by these pagan gods, and it claims that all of these gods were born on December 25th, born of a virgin, had a star in the east, 12 disciples, walked on water, crucified, died, and 3 days later was resurrected and ascended into heaven. So this is a very popular idea that's been around for a while. And many people believe in it. They've read a book, they've seen something on TV, and they say, wow, I never knew this before. You know, they tried to really pull the wool over our eyes with this deception of just another mythical god. And if any of you have seen the movie, Bill Maher's movie some years back, Religiosity, he has this list in that movie where he checks off, just like Jesus, there was Horus and Mithra and all these other pagan gods. And Ching, born December 25th, Ching, born of a virgin, Ching, was crucified on a cross, Ching, walked on water, Ching, he died and was resurrected, But we hear a lot about this, and there's a lot of information on the internet. There's a lot of books that are written about this sort of thing. But let me ask a question right here. Is it actually true? You see, when I cover a subject like this on the spirit side, it's not to get anyone to change their religion or their faith or believe something else. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not here to, proselytize or win converts for anything. I have my beliefs and people have their beliefs. But what I do on this show is we cover a wide range of topics. And one of the things I like to do here is talk about things in spirituality or even conspiracy theories that are floating around out there that get very popular in society. And if they're not exactly true or not exactly what they appear to be, I like to talk about them here on the show and give the honest, logical, and balanced perspective. Because, there's a lot of people out there that believe a lot of things and they don't necessarily do their homework or do their own research. They just feel because someone else said it, or somebody who's a PhD or has a lot of letters after their name, has the big education, well, they must know what they're talking about. and the information they're giving me must be true. It must be accurate. So I'm just going to take it at face value. And folks, that is a dangerous thing to do. And I know that full well because many of you know my story, that I came out of fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, and there were people that were, PhDs and scholars and theologians, and had the title, doctor, and they gave lectures and they wrote books and they had all this information out there that, man, you thought it was true. These guys had it together. They were giving us the truth about our faith and the history of our faith. And then come to find out, a lot of it actually wasn't true. But why would someone do that? Why would someone purposely fudge with the events of history or give you pseudoscience, to try to prove their point? Well, I suppose there could be several reasons for that. Is A, they really believe what they're saying and they're looking for any little piece of evidence that will substantiate it, whether it's spurious or not. Or the person is deliberately looking to deceive us in some way. And usually when it comes to the religious deception, there are monetary units attached to that deception. So just because someone sounds like they're smart and they have all the right degrees and went to this university and that university, doesn't necessarily mean what they're telling you is the truth. And herein lies this problem with this particular Christ conspiracy. A lot of us heard about it. We believe it, and you hear a lot of people. Did you know, I've done podcasts where I've mentioned, Jesus or the teachings of Jesus, and someone will email or comment on one of the video platforms that I might put the podcast on and say, did you know there were many Jesuses throughout time, many Christs, they all had the same story. They were born of a virgin. So a lot of people believe this without actually looking into it to see if it's true. And we're going to do that in a minute. We're going to take a look at some of these pagan gods and compare their story to that of Jesus, their actual story, and see if there are any real similarities or not. Now, this was something when I came out of fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, probably within my first year and a half, I ran across this information and I believed it. And I just said to myself, aha, look, these people not only lied to us about everything else, but they're even lying to us that this Jesus character existed. He's just a knockoff of all these pagan gods. Oh my gosh, how gullible are we? But then one day, there was something actually about this pagan god Mithra that I found intriguing. And I wanted to know more about Mithra. So I started doing some digging on Mithra. I got some books on Mithra. And one of the first things I realized right out of the gate was that, there was no virgin birth at the beginning of this God's story. And it was quite different than what I was told with that little checklist, born on December 25th, born of a virgin, etc., etc. And that made me think, gee, is this just another face of bad information and or deception coming from another field of spirituality or non-spirituality, much like the fundamentalist evangelical movement. Here they are presenting us with this information that sounds real good, but gee golly, behind the mask, it's something completely different. So I started to look at some of these other gods. And lo and behold, I sat there scratching my head going, geez, these guys are nowhere even close to the story of Jesus Christ in the Bible. So let's take a look at some of these individuals right now and see what the differences actually are. And this isn't going to be an exhaustive list of these particular gods of old. So I hope this will be enough to spur you onward to do your own research in the future. And also give you, a little bit of ammunition to say, when something like this comes down the pike, I'm going to research it myself. I'm just not going to take this at face value. Because there's a lot of people that seem like that they would know what they're talking about. They have the education, why would they lie? How would they not know that this is not so? What really spurred me to do this podcast is I was watching a show on the Gaia channel the other day, and I'm sure many of you know the Gaia channel. It's a good channel. It's got a lot of documentaries. You can watch things about the afterlife and angels and UFOs and ancient civilizations. It's got some really great stuff on there. But I was watching this one show, and it was part of a series. It was kind of like a talk show. And that's where I got the name for this podcast, because the name of the show was The Christ Conspiracy. And they had this woman in the studio who was, like an anthropologist, archaeologist. She spoke several languages, could translate several languages. I think it was up to like 7 languages. Very educated woman. And this is what she was talking about, that all these religions are so similar, that they all come from the same source. And she was on this thing about, the gods that were born of a virgin, that were crucified, that rose again, and they ascended. And she was talking about Mithra. And I had to stop right there. And I said to my wife, I said, if she has this information wrong, how can we trust in anything else that she's saying? Because the whole premise of her argument is built on something that's absolutely not true. Now, I'm not going to get into, was she trying to deceive people? I don't think she was. I think she was one of these people that read this information, took it at face value, kind of ran with it, maybe didn't really dig into it herself to be able to say, gee, somewhat of my credentials, I really don't want to get on a public show and talk about this if there's so many holes in this hypothesis, in this theory that I'm putting forth. So I don't think she was there to deceive anyone purposefully. I don't think that at all. But still, the information was faulty. And see, that's just the thing, folks. When you know even a little, and then you hear somebody talk on these subjects, if they start hitting on points that are not true, then that gives you the red alert to say, gee, I'm going to look into this individual or this information, because I know that this, and this is not real information. It is not truth. So digging into some of these individuals, let's take a look at them and see if they're really all that similar to the person of Jesus Christ. And we'll start with my buddy, my friend, Mithra, who unraveled this knot for me years ago. Again, Mithra, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, star in the east, had 12 disciples, performed miracles, dead for 3 days, resurrected, and was said he was nailed to a cross. Well, Mithra actually did not have a virgin birth. He didn't have a birth at all in the literal sense that we know of birth. Mithra actually emerged as a full-grown adult out of a rock. I kid you not on this, ladies and gentlemen. He did not even have a human mother. He was not born in a manger. He was not baby Mithra with 3 wise men. He emerged as a fully grown adult out of a rock. And he also was not crucified because there is no record. If we look at Mithric scholar Gordon Richard, who says there's actually no death of Mithra ever recorded. So he was eternal. He didn't die. So if he didn't die, there was no crucifixion. There was no Last Supper. He was not buried, and he was not raised again on the 3rd day. So, these simple things really show right from the get-go that there are very stark differences between the story of Jesus and the story of Mithra. And it's also interesting to note that most of what we know about Mithra comes after Jesus at the end of the 1st century. And many scholars believe that Mithraism might have even drawn influences from early Christianity, and that is probably so, because if you research Mithra, you will find that there is, I believe he was an early Persian god, but later there was a Mithra cult that was revived in the Roman Empire around the time of early Christianity. And I believe his name was spelled a bit different. If you look at the god Mithra, the Persian Mithra was Mithra. In the Roman revived cult of Mithra during the time of early Christianity, it was spelled Mitras, so it was more like Mithras. So, we can certainly see where some people may have seen writings during the 1st century of Christianity where this cult of Mithra was kind of revived, and they may have borrowed from the growing religion of Christianity, not the other way around. But now what about our friend Dionysus? Well, he's a very popular one that they say he was born of a virgin, 3 wise men, crucified, died, raised again, star in the east. But Dionysus also did not have a virgin birth or a virgin mother. Dionysus was actually the product of a god, Zeus, having sex with a mortal woman, Semele or Semele, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, Semele, I'll just say Semele. But this was the product of a god having actual intercourse with a mortal woman. So it was not a virgin birth. She was impregnated by Zeus, and Dionysus was the product of this union. And the myth, the Greek epic, goes on to say, and Semele, daughter of Cadmos, was joined with Zeus in love, and bare him a splendid son, joyous Dionysus, a mortal woman and a mortal son, and now they both are gods. Now, as far as our friend Dionysus being crucified and raising from the dead 3 days later, this is not so either. Actually, it is said that Dionysus was torn up into a bunch of pieces by the Titans. He was then boiled in a pot and then eaten by them. And there are actually at least 6 different accounts of what happens to his remains after that. So there's really no correspondence here with crucifixion and resurrection, other than that the myth goes on to say that Dionysus was deceived by the Titans and expelled from the throne of Jupiter. He was torn into pieces by them, and his remains being afterwards put back together again, and he returned, as it were, once more to life and ascended to heaven. So it's quite a bit different than the story of Jesus. There is no virgin birth, there is no manger, there is no wise man, there is no star in the east. All of that certainly being taken off the table. Next we have Horus, and Horus is another big one. A lot of other people will say, man, did you know that the story of Horus was exactly the same as Jesus? Jesus is Horus. Well, I hate to pop that bubble, but actually he was not. Horus was not born of a virgin. He was actually conceived by the goddess Isis, who had sex with the god Osiris. After, again, Osiris was said to have been torn into pieces, and his remains were scattered over Egypt, and Isis resurrected him, had sex with him, and she gave birth to their child, Horus. So, again, not a virgin birth. He was the son of a god and a goddess, not that of a virgin. Was he crucified and resurrected? Actually, no, because there is not a single record of Horus ever dying in the tale and myth of Horus. So much like Mithra, there's no record of the death. So he was not a dying and rising god, since he didn't die. It's interesting to note this quote from historian J.Z. Smith, who wrote an essay in the Encyclopedia of Religion. And speaking of this very topic, he says, the category of dying and rising gods, once a major topic of scholarly investigation, must now be understood to have been largely a misnomer based on imaginative reconstructions and exceedingly late or highly ambiguous texts. And I just want to pause there and interject that this was one of the ways, or one of the reasons, in which this whole Jesus being nothing more than a knockoff of the old pagan gods was disproven, is that a lot of there are papers that exist that have very similar Christian or Christ-like qualities, but they were papers that were written very late, even during the time or after the time of Christ, kind of Christianizing the old gods. The cults were kind of Christianizing the old gods because of the spread and popularity, I suppose, of Christianity. But if you go back to the actual myths that were written, that are accurate from the time period of these gods, you will find that there is no similarity to them or Jesus whatsoever. And that's what we're looking at right now. And one of the people that make it on this list, I find very bizarre. Sometimes he's on the list, sometimes he isn't. And that is Buddha. That Buddha was said to be born on December 25th, born of a virgin, had followers, did very similar to Jesus. But that is not true at all. All you have to do is a little bit of reading. Read the Gospel of the Buddha, read any Buddha material that talks about his early life, and you will see that he is the son of a mother and a father, a king and a queen. And, he ends up leaving the palace. He goes out searching the meaning of life, the meaning of suffering. He becomes the Buddha. He was not crucified. He died in a grove of trees of old age, and he had some health problems at that time. And it was said that he was lying, on his side in this grove of trees, and he was speaking to his followers, and he passed away. So he was not crucified by any means. He was not born on December 25th. He didn't have, all this, Christ-like stuff going on around him. He never even claimed to be a god, so I don't know. This one seems really contrived, and if that's not kind of a dead giveaway that somebody's really looking to fit square pegs in round holes by pushing this notion that all these gods and figures of the past were exactly the same of Jesus, and Jesus is just another myth that's copied from the same, cookie cutter as them, then I don't know what is, because that's one that really takes a lot of forcing into the hole with Buddha. And now I want to take a look at another very popular one that we hear about, which is Krishna. Many folks say that, Krishna was the clone, or rather Jesus was the clone of Krishna. But is it so? Let's and forgive me if I butcher some of the Indian names here in my notes. I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce many of them, but let's take a look at Krishna's story. Did he have a virgin birth? Well, Krishna's mother, first of all, in the story and legend, was not a virgin. She had 7 other children before Krishna was conceived. And Krishna's birth was credited by way of mental transmission through the mind of Vasudeva, which is a god or a goddess, into the womb of Devaki, which is Krishna's mother. So she wasn't a virgin. She had 7 other children. Krishna was said to be the 8th son of Vasudeva. The celebration of Krishna's birthday is not on December 25th, but is actually on one of the most prominent festivals in India, which takes place in late summer or early fall. Krishna was not crucified. He died when the hunter Jara shot him in the sole of his foot. In most stories, it was said to be an accident. In one story, Jara was actually a demon getting revenge for being killed by Krishna in a previous life. The reason Krishna died the way he did was that with the expectation of the soles of his feet, his body was with the exception of the soles of his feet, his body was invincible due to a boon granted by the sage, and again I'm going to butcher this name, Dionysus. So he was shot in the sole of the foot because it was said that he was pretty much invulnerable except for the soles of his feet. He was not crucified between 2 thieves. Nothing like that at all is in the authentic Hindu sources. Krishna did not die for our sins, but in fulfillment of 2 curses made against him and his clan. The curse of the widow Gandhari, for not stopping the battle in which her husband died, and the curse of the Brahmins for a stunt Krishna's son Samba played on some holy men. Krishna's spirit does ascend into heaven, but his body remains on earth and is cremated. So we see in the actual Hindu legend and story quite a difference between that of Jesus and Krishna. So again, ladies and gentlemen, I just have to reiterate that, we can't believe everything that we hear or everything that's presented to us, especially, when it comes to subjects like this. There are always people that have an axe to grind or a profit to make. They're always trying to win the converts one way or the other. You really have to do your own due diligence and seek these things out. And there are such dead giveaways in some of this as well, saying that all these other God figures were born on December 25th. Well, anybody who has, a half an ounce of education and knowing about these subjects knows that nowhere in the biblical accounts does it say that Jesus was ever born on December 25th. It doesn't say when he was born at all, so we have no idea. It was the Roman Catholic Church that tried to Christianize another pagan festival, the rising of the sun god, the birth of the sun god at the winter solstice, that they moved, the birth of Christ as a celebration to Christianize that particular very popular pagan holiday. So it's not a biblical thing or an early Christian thing that Jesus was born on December 25th. This was a Catholic Church Christianizing pagan festival thing that came much later on. And again, this is all something that was disproven, dismantled, debunked a long time ago. Scholars really poured over this. They read many of the accounts and the papers, and they dated the papers, what was authentic, what was not. And, things like this have a way of making a resurgence in our world. And those of us, the generations who are not familiar with what happened once upon a time, this was already a thing, this was already dealt with, this was already debunked. We think it's new information, especially today we get on this kick of, they were hiding this from us all this time, the big conspiracy, everything's a conspiracy, everything's a lie, everything is, has some kind of agenda attached to it. Well, some things do, but not all things, and especially not this one. This is just a resurgence of an old issue that was long put to rest. But sometimes people still stumble upon those old books or those old papers that were written by someone who thought that this was true, and they seemed like they had the education, they seemed that they were smart enough and wise enough, and they wrote a book. As the woman in the show that I was talking about on Gaia, she said she ran across this information in a book that was not even a published work. It was a book that was, mostly cardboard and put together with this plastic spiral spine. And this is where she got a hold of this information. And it was just so fascinating and wonderful to her. And, this really started her path on all of this. And sometimes people come across, these old books, these old works, and they say, wow, I discovered something that nobody's talking about, nobody knows about. Look at this farce we've been sold. And they don't know that this had already been something that was really poured over laboriously and proved to be not so at all. So the next time somebody tells you, hey, did you know there was more than one Christ? There were many Christs. There was Krishna, there was Horus, there was, maybe play this podcast for them and say, well, I wouldn't be so quick on the draw with that one because this is old information that's making a revival in our world, and it is not necessarily true at all. So do your research, ladies and gentlemen. Don't believe something just because someone tells you that it's so. I hope you enjoyed this show. I hope you got something out of it. I really appreciate you listening. I always appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to the things that I have to say here on the spirit side. Until next time, stay safe out there, everybody, and I'll see you next time here on the podcast.